Okay, so in this video, I'm going to tell you something that I hope after you hear this, you're not just going to hit end and go to the next video. But I like to give you guys an idea of what isn't going to be on the test. And I know there's a lot of material in this class. And so if I know that something isn't going to be on the exam, then I'm going to tell you. And the information in this video is not going to be on the exam. I still think it's a good idea to watch it because it'll give you an idea of why I'm talking about the things that I'm going to be talking about in the next videos, which will be on the exam. So you can think of this as background. You can kind of kick back and not worry about taking a bunch of notes, but just listen. And that's what I hope you'll do. So we were talking about powers that the president has, and I just want to mention some other powers that presidents have, just so you have a more well-rounded idea of presidential powers. So among the other powers they have, they can nominate various officials who serve in the executive branch. Each time an administration comes in, there are approximately 2,000 or more positions that have to be filled. Ambassadors to different countries, heads of different agencies, and not just the head, but it'll be the secretary of a department, the deputy secretary of the department, all kinds of positions that have to be filled. And so one of the first tasks of any incoming president is to fill all these spots. Some of them don't have to be approved by the Senate. Some do. And so that's just something that every president, when they're still what's called the president-elect, meaning they've won the election, but they haven't been sworn into office yet, one of the first tasks they have to do is figure out who they want to appoint to their positions, because come January 20th, when they take over, there's going to be a transition from one administration to the next, and they want to have as many of those positions filled or ready to go as possible. The other power that presidents have is the power to grant pardons. A pardon basically means that if somebody is has been convicted of a crime, or might be charged with a crime, the president can basically say, this person can't be charged, or this person was charged, I'm going to wipe the conviction off the books. Or if the person was charged for a federal crime, they can commute the sentence, meaning they can reduce the sentence. So if somebody was convicted of a crime and they were sentenced to 10 years in jail, the president can just say they get to go free now. They've served enough time. And the power to grant pardons is one of the few powers of the presidency that is not checked. Congress can't override a pardon. That's just a power that the framers felt the president should have in order to handle any potential miscarriages of justice that may have happened. Now, it only can be applied to federal crimes. So if somebody's convicted of a state crime, the president can't pardon them because the president isn't part of the state government, the president's part of the federal government. But when it comes to federal crimes, presidents have the authority to pardon people, and it's basically one of the few powers that's just unchecked. And there have been times when I would submit to you that presidents have abused this power. I'm not going to go into detail about that, but if you ask about it on the discussion board, I'll be happy to elaborate. So that's it for presidential powers, formal presidential powers. What I want to talk about now is the expansion of presidential power, and just sort of do a very brief history of this. As I said to you, from the perspective of the framers, the president was supposed to take a secondary role in sort of the political world. Congress was supposed to be the center of the political universe. That's where the debates over policy were supposed to happen. compromises were supposed to be reached, agreements, all that, bills passed and then sent to the president. The center of the decision making was supposed to happen in Congress. And with some really important exceptions, for the most part, throughout the 1800s, presidents behaved pretty much the way the framers intended. Right. That's why there are a whole bunch of presidents in the 1800s whose names you probably have never heard of. I'm not going to go over them, but there are, because they didn't particularly stand out. So through the 1700s, the 1800s, for the most part, presidents conformed to the way the framers intended presidents to act. But by the 1900s, presidential power is starting to grow tremendously. And there are reasons for that. One of the reasons is the U.S. is turning into a superpower. The U.S. economy is growing. We're shifting from, at that point, a rural economy to an industrial economy. And this is going to, so instead of people living on farms and bartering with one another, there starts to be large factories and large cities being developed. And as these cities are starting to develop, it requires more and more government intervention in the economy. Let me give you my perspective from a plumber, an ex-plumber. Before, when we were primarily a rural economy, how did people dispose of human waste, right? Let's get real, talk plumbing. If you're on a small farm, what you do is you dig a hole, a septic pit, and that's where you go to the bathroom, right? Where do you get your water? You dig a hole in a well, you tap a well, and that's where you get your water. But once people start moving to cities and cities are starting to grow in large populations, you can't have people digging holes all over the place, right? And so what has to happen? Well, there needs to be a way to dispose of all that waste. And so the government starts getting involved. They put in the sewer systems. They're the ones who set up the water system so that water can be piped into factories and into homes and into apartment buildings. This requires government intervention in a way that previously wasn't needed before. If you think about it, if you've got millions of people living in a city, when we were on farms, everybody just grew their own food and they bartered with other people. If I was growing wheat and somebody else was a rancher and somebody else had vegetables, we might trade with one another. But in the cities, now food has to be shipped in, right? Milk has to be shipped in, meat, vegetables, all kinds of things have to be shipped in via train to the cities. That usually involves interstate commerce. That involves the government inspecting these things to make sure that the food that's coming into these cities isn't tainted. And so as the federal government had to get more involved in the economy and more involved in regulation, new federal agencies were created by Congress to address these new challenges of a growing U.S. economy and the change from this rural sort of lifestyle to an industrial lifestyle with the development of large cities. So Congress starts creating agencies to address these new problems. And when these agencies are created, they're put into the executive branch. And because they're in the executive branch, the president is the head of the executive branch. And so therefore, this gives presidents a little bit more control, because the reality is that when you give somebody more responsibility, you're also giving them more power. And so one of the things about the growth of presidential power that doesn't get nearly enough attention, and it's important today as it was back then, is that part of the reason that presidential power has grown so much is because Congress gave presidents that much power. The framers created the system of checks and balances to prevent the president from trying to take power from Congress, to prevent the president from trying to take power from the courts, right? What the framers didn't anticipate and didn't build the mechanisms for was that Congress was going to be going, here, President, you do this and you do this and you have responsibility for this and you have the responsibility for this and this. They didn't anticipate Congress giving presidents a ton of power. And so part of the reason that presidential power has grown, part of the reason that presidents have assumed a more central position in the political world, different than what the framers had in mind, is because Congress gave them that power. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that's a problem. The world changed in some really fundamental ways. I don't know how else it could be arranged. What I do know is that that isn't what the framers had in mind. The framers weren't anticipating a president being as powerful as our presidents are. And I'm not talking about a particular president, I'm talking about all of our presidents, especially since World War II. And so I'll end this on a sort of weird note, but something that I think is true. If we could reanimate the framers, we could bring them back to life, and we brought them to the world as it is today, the 2020s, and we showed them our political system, I think they would look at the power that presidents wield and they think, man, we screwed up. Sorry, we screwed up. They would look at our presidents and they would think, man, we were trying so hard not to have there be a king, and essentially that's what developed. Hey, we're really sorry. Again, I don't know that they could have been done any other way, but I do know that there are a number of areas where in which Congress can, if they have the will to do so, pull back power from the president. And so in the next video, I'm going to talk about an effort on the part of Congress where they try and take back power from the president or try and reassert their own role, and their effort is unsuccessful. And then I'm going to talk about another effort on their part to restrain presidential power that was successful.